Welcome to Publishing for Digital Minds Question Time, 45 minutes of topical debate on issues around the present and future of digital publishing. Now, here to take your questions, please welcome author Nick Harkaway, Johnny Geller, the joint CEO of Agents Curtis Brown, Dominic Raca, the CEO of Sourcebooks, CEO and Chief Content Officer of Kobo, Michael Tamlin, Sam Burridge, the MD of Open Research Nature Publishing Group, Palgrave Macmillan, and Stephen Page, Chief Executive of Faber and Faber. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panel. Now, we're going to be taking a combination of pre-loaded questions, none of which the panel know, and also some questions from the floor. And the first question, coincidentally, comes from the gentleman we've just heard from. Is Dan Franklin in the room? And I know he is.
Right there.
Just shout it out, Dan.
Digital Dan.
Is it a golden age of publishing, or is it our darkest hour?
Is it the golden age of publishing or our darkest hour? Stephen Page.
Oh, God. Well, I'm trying to come up with a sort of mixed metaphor that probably no one ever knew it was the golden hour when it was the golden hour. I think it's a time of extraordinary opportunity and interest. I wouldn't be able to bear it, I think, if we were sitting in a world that was full of certainties and it was too easy in some way to imagine how to create, you know, what our central role, which is to create value for writers. And at a time when the industry is changing so much, it's bound to be good for some and bad for others. And I think probably I'd like to think that the publishing companies that evolve and are successful will look back and say, what an extraordinary experience, what a golden age that was. In the same way that publishing's already become a different thing. It has a wider footprint now. It has self-publishing as part of the publishing universe. It has a strange sort of ecology of relationship between big companies and small companies. There's just a whole range of ways where I think publishing's much more of a vociferous activity now than it was when I first came into the industry. It's being challenged as well as being presented with opportunity. So I'd err on the golden era, but I suspect it would be a dreadful thing to know it was a golden era. You know, I think you must feel challenge and sort of energy, and if we do it right, it will have been a golden era.
So we'll know when it comes. Nick, what's the author perspective on that question?
It's a golden age for access to information, for access to narratives, for the creation of narratives. If it's not a golden age for publishing, something's wrong.
Now, can I have, is there anyone on the panel who has a more pessimistic view than either of us? And if it isn't your actual view, give a pessimistic view. Johnny, do you...
Well, I think when I started publishing, I thought that was the dark ages, and that's what everyone thought were the good old days, you know, where it was all gatekeepers and it was who you knew and how do you get in. You cannot express yourself if you didn't have a series of people telling you that you can. Whereas now, I do think everything's up for grabs, and that will create innovation. I think it is the dark ages for lots of people still in agenting and publishing at the moment, and they will probably die.
So the golden age, and then they disappear. Dominic, what's the view of this from perhaps an American perspective?
I think perhaps a slightly different way to think about this, because I love listening to Dan, and is that it may be the beginning of the golden age of readership. That actually provides enormous opportunities. I think it provides all the opportunities Steve's talking about. It will provide a wholesome change, I think, for the relationship between authors and publishers, and will, in fact, redefine publishing. But it is a beginning of a change in readership.
Now, Sam, from the academic publisher point of view, slightly different to a lot of what we've heard today, which has perhaps a bit more of a trade focus, but what's the view from your neck of the woods?
I think it's, in a sense, for us, the golden age has been happening for a while, if it is indeed a golden age. So it's been a good 15 years, really, that we've been doing what is now new everywhere else, I suppose. So it feels the norm. I would say to really embrace anything and make it a golden age, so it depends on who we attract into our business. And one of the things I think we've been really bad at doing, and people have sort of referred to this, is there's been lots of closed doors. We were only attracting one type of person, arguably, into our industry. And I think to truly make the difference in the world that we can with information of any kind, I think we have to make sure we're attracting the right people, and we know how to be clear about what publishing is and what it can be, and not so limited as I feel we've been in the past.
Absolutely. And Michael, finally to you. I mean, Kobo, a company that I guess has come of age in this golden age. So where do you see the curve at the moment? Is this golden age going to go on getting more and more gilded, or is the tarnish starting to starting to appear?
Gilded, certainly, but in I think in ways that none of us really suspected when we first started this. I absolutely agree with Dominique that there has never been more attention paid to the reader than is paid now. I think either inside publishing houses or inside retailers, for that matter. But similarly, I'd also say it's the beginning of a new age for the author. There are more authors expressing themselves in more ways, finding more readers than has ever been the case before. And that's another thing that we've been able to sort of grab a hold of and run with, and is impossibly exciting. And especially compared to, I think, the long march that authors have had over the last sort of 30 or 40 years, even 50 years, trying to get closer to that reader and trying to crack open some of those ramparts that have previously existed.
Thank you. That's a fantastically optimistic way to start the session, and it can't possibly carry on. Dan, you asked the question, what would your answer to your own question be, and anything you want to come back on?
I totally agree that I think it's a sort of unprecedented age for access to information and creativity. And I think it's certainly a golden age for reading and writing. I think some of the issues facing publishers are, they're tangible. But I wouldn't be doing what I do if I wasn't extremely optimistic about the future for everyone involved. But primarily, I think the creative drivers are authors, and we have to support them in any way we can. And that involves that creative collaboration, which has always been there, digital or not.
Thanks, Dan. Now, I'm going to come to the audience for a question after this one, but here's one that was sent in beforehand, and I'm going to start with Johnny on this one, and you'll see why the minute I ask it. And you hinted at this just now. Is the literary agent, as we know it, doomed? Do they need to broaden their remit if they are to survive?
Yes, we're all doomed. No. Unsurprisingly, I think there are certain types of agents that are doomed, to be honest, because I think the business models are the same, and they have been the same for 50 years. And I think authors, whether they know it or they don't know it, have changed completely. Their needs are completely different. And I think we are transitioning, which is a word I hate, into a different role. Agent no longer, I think, is the right term. I think an agent is a broker of a deal, and that's about it. Whereas actually we kind of manage intellectual copyright and the author. We're managing a career, and really our role is to allow any great author to express themselves in any medium. And however that's done, we must facilitate it. Mm-hmm. And I think some agencies are set up or setting themselves up to do that, and some agencies will never be able to do that. And I think loyalty, devotion, and editorial unity is incredibly important in a relationship with an author. But I think that's been the mainstay of too many smaller agencies who haven't thought about, well, what is going to happen to my author when they hit big? What is going to happen when different challenges come? And that's why I think agenting, we thought 10 years ago about should we be large, should we be small, what does large mean, should we go into production, or should we stay siloed into our different areas? How do we influence publishers? These are the questions that we're asking every day, and our authors are actually demanding it. And they need to be answered. So I think, to be honest, agenting, I don't know whether this is actually true, but someone once told me that the source of the water flows strongest near its source. So I sort of feel that is a metaphor for agenting. As long as we are as close as we can to where the creative material is, the agent will always have a future.
And Nick, I'm bound to ask you your view on that.
I'm very confident of agencies, as Johnny said, sort of remaining but transforming. And because agencies tend to be smaller enterprises, they can also transform more readily. They can decide on the Monday that this is something they need to get into, and by Thursday they can have an idea of what they're going to do. You know, it doesn't require that a question be kicked up to the committee stage and debated for a couple of weeks and so on. I mean, I think authors, generally speaking, and obviously what we want to do is write. We also want to be taken care of a little bit. We want to have a sense of strategy in the future and so on. And basically, different authors are good at different things, and the places where you fall down are the places where you want to lean on your agent. And you need somebody who is unequivocally on your team, you know, and whose relationship with you is notionally permanent, you know, to make those choices. Ultimately, in the course of a career, you're likely to move publishing houses. It does happen. You know, the days when that didn't happen anymore are over. So, you know, I think you need someone to lean on. It's very possible now to work, you know, as a self-published writer, to work without an agent and so on, but I think you probably have to handle a great deal more of the stuff that you don't really want to deal with. And Hugh Howey was very confident about that earlier, and he said, you know, you want to get into this, you have to get into it anyway, and so on. But I think still in all, it's nice to have someone in your corner.
Thanks, Nick. And Stephen, from, if you like, the other side of the fence on that, what's your experience of agents?
Yeah, I think Johnny has it about right, that you know, they looked about 2 or 3 years ago. I think I said something about it was sort of like a riot of cross-dressing going on in the world of retailing, publishing, agenting, writing. Everyone seemed to want to do everyone else's jobs, but there's no doubt that the job that an agent does is different in its core than the job that a publisher does, and it is important for writers. You know, I find good agenting, if you like, is incredibly important for the publishing house as well. It's a very healthy relationship, but I would say that agenting has, some portions of the agenting community have been a conservative force on the ability of publishers to develop the market.
Ooh, can I just...
Yes, go on. This is what we want. Healthy debate.
The facilitation of serendipity, it's something agents can do very well. Agents have a big Rolodex, they have lots of clients that they work with, and they know lots of publishers, and they also know people who are outside the immediate compass of publishing and authoring, because they're reaching out to them because they want books from them, so they know neuroscientists, or they know, you know, people who founded plumbing companies and ended up as MPs, whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is, when you're an author, you very often want to be put in a room with someone. You want the creation of serendipity. Authoring is, by its nature, to a certain extent, a relatively solitary profession. So the creation of serendipity, the making of a space where authors, publishers, whatever, can meet, overlap, and discover, oh, we could do this, wouldn't that be awesome, is a really, really useful role, and I think it's something agents can do very well.
Oh, I like that. I'm going to use that.
There we go.
But publishers
no
can do it too.
Yeah, yes, and well, no, yeah, but I think there is still, you know, you have it right there, Nick. It's good to have somebody to have a constructive and brokered conversation with, and to raise difficulty, to, you know, all those conversations. But there's no help if an agent doesn't really understand what modern publishing is, and we come across that. Because publishing is nothing like it was 10 years ago. Good. You know, it's nothing like it was, and I've been in the industry 20 years. If it is like it was 10 years ago, it will fail.
And yet the contracts haven't changed.
Well, let's
come in.
Let's just talk about what at least in the U.S., what the world looks like. We in the U.S. are producing about 3,500 books a day. That's what we publish, okay? And what that means for an author is that breaking through that noise, that incredible clutter, requires almost ultra curation, right? So we're now looking at an age of agenting in sort of an ultra curated way, right? Because the need is, and the challenge is, that every author decision is far more weighty. What is that title? What is the title that's going to break through? What is the right cover? What is the right marketing methodology? Every one of those decisions becomes, in a world of so much content, becomes extraordinarily important.
Mm-hmm. And Kobo have got a role to play in that sort of thing, have they not? Another
well, and in some ways we're taking it from the other side, where there is, you know, ultra curating going on. In some ways, we'd rather take it all in and then use what we know about individual readers, use what we know about the individual book, and try to match match a reader and a book at a time. And can do that in some ways, sometimes with the guidance of publishers, but often not. You know, thousands of new self-published titles coming in every day. And oddly enough, that aren't selling ones or twos, that are selling 10s and 50s and 100s as we manage to put readers and writers together. So I think it's becoming, ultra curated in Johnny's world, more like kind of managing a hydroelectric plant on our side as we manage this river of titles flowing through.
Thanks. Now I'd like to. Sorry, I was
just going to say that, and there is, of course, a big communication challenge to publishers, agents, writers around the volume of publishing and the degree of the portfolio game that publishing is. The lack of communication from publishing houses at times, I think, has been a problem for publishers. The specific plans around specific writers and books, ongoing engagement with backlists. This is a big challenge to already very, time poor businesses to be able to communicate extremely well. I think the agent again can play a very strong role in creating structure around that and holding the publisher to account, which it should be able to do itself. But it is, it's a very, very busy environment, the publishing environment.
Indeed. Now I'd like to throw it out to the audience. I can see a man with a lollipop there. Can we have your name, if you'd like to give it, and where you're from?
This is Jeremy Greenfield from Digital Book World, from America.
Thank you. And your question?
Yes, I have a question. In the long run, is the rise and dominance of Amazon a good thing for readers, authors, and publishers?
In the long run, how do you know they're dominant? Sooner or later, somebody could unseat them. They only have to make a very small mistake for a very short period of time.
This might be a golden age for Amazon. It's going to come to an end.
It was a serious question.
No, it's a very good point. Yeah.
As the retailer on the panel, I'll take a run at that.
Yeah.
I think in general, monocultures are never a good idea. It wouldn't be good if we had one publisher publishing all books in the UK. It wouldn't be great if we had one retailer selling them. The very fact that there are different retailers in the market means that we have people throwing all of their skill and talented attention at figuring out what that reader wants next. We're all going to do it in different ways. We saw Dan Franklin stand up and look at another way that we could try and get this done. We need to keep pushing and innovating on how that connection gets made. I don't think we'd ever want to put it in the hands of one entity, and we certainly don't. We don't intend to. But I think the most interesting part of it is that so much of this market swings on the preferences of a relatively small number of readers. This, like so many other businesses, is a place where kind of 10% of the customers make up the majority of the sales. Those people who read 2 books a week, those people who have a pile of books next to their bedside. It's the fight for those that we're focused on. Because picking up more of those really matters, and much more so than the long and desperate hunt to find another 10 or 20,000 of those people that buy 1 book a year. And so when you talk about small decisions that can make a market or change a market, it's both changes in taste and change in preference and change in our ability to serve and get people excited about the way that we sell books versus, say, some of our competitors. And so that's where we fight.
Thanks, Mike. Sam, what's the Palgrave Macmillan view of Amazon's strength?
Yeah, so on the book side rather than the journal side, obviously, I don't have it seems it's a much shorter chain for us in the sense that we don't have agents and we don't need Amazon on the journal side. But on the book side, I think that it's never going to be good, as you say, if we only have Amazon and they're too dominant. And at times they have been and they are, and in certain aspects to do with various things, they haven't been a great force. But the long tail's amazing. The fact that they can disseminate content to a much broader range of people has been phenomenal and will continue to be, and makes it much more viable. And for people that say that that's killed the independent bookshops on its own, the long tail, I don't agree with it. Those sales were stopping anyway, and Amazon just makes it more possible. And I'm talking very much about sort of the academic world of books. So in that way, I think it's fabulous. I also think that you can learn an awful lot from Amazon. So I could criticise huge amounts of things about them, but look, the fact that they made themselves a dominant brand by being in early and innovating early is something that we can learn from, and that's the whole trust thing and the trusted brand that that is needed in the internet, the whole quality, the service thing, the fact that they do push forward innovation. There are things they've done really well. So just dismissing them because they're the big guys is not the right approach.
As Stephen, earlier, Anthony Horowitz said, and I'm only slightly paraphrasing, Amazon, they're complete bastards, but I love them. Is that also a publisher view?
Echoing what Sam has said, when you think of the contribution Amazon have made to the evolution of the book market over the last 15 years, it's impossible to argue anything other than a very powerful role. And one would say that if tomorrow someone said, oh, Amazon are pulling out of the book market, I don't think any of us would be pleased.
Exactly.
But at the same time, one of the interesting things, I suppose, about a very large dominant force is that others are attracted to the opportunity that they've clearly exploited. And as we were just saying, just what Dan was presenting just now, I've seen more sort of interesting innovation startup businesses in the last 6 months than I've seen in the last 2 or 3 years, and a lot of them are involved in the sort of the democratization of opportunity to buy and discover content. And publishers were absolutely obsessed with this subject right now, is about how we can navigate an ecology that involves a very dominant force in Amazon, but also a high street presence that we're hoping we can sustain, because it's an important part of the ecology. I think it's actually important to Amazon, that ecology. And so I suppose, I suspect that we're beginning to witness the more interesting, if you like, the more various ecology, and publishers must embrace this, and there are things they're going to have to think really hard about in order to embrace it, and that's something to do with skills, something to do with the digital rights management of the books that they publish, and that's a conversation that goes back to the conversation about agents and authors.
With agents.
About how we remove the friction from the travelling of our licensed content across the internet. The internet is a universe. Bill Thompson probably said that earlier, and he's probably here. Amazon is a galaxy within the universe, and we have to navigate that. And we have to do things to allow us to do that more freely. Thankfully, Amazon exists and is an incredibly reliable way for people to actually purchase the copyright.
I seem to remember that Barnes & Noble was the evil empire, and then supermarkets in this country were even more evil, and now everyone wishes that Barnes & Noble were more powerful and the supermarkets were even stronger. I think we go wherever the best delivery system is. And luckily we have 2 fantastic systems and many more on the high street, but that's what we want. We just want excellence, to be honest. And I think if there is one dominant force, that normally brings everybody up, and innovation in the middle will knock it. So I think it's quite.
Would you agree with that?
There's a bit of a challenge, though, when you lose. We lost Borders, right? And when you're left with a dominant force in the online space, which is both online and ebooks, I would say Amazon's dominant in both, and those are not the same, and it's important to distinguish them. And then you've got Barnes & Noble, very much the dominant force in brick and mortar. And because we have that, I think you find publishing much more challenged in the US. I think those are not good things. I agree with Michael completely that monopoly does not serve anyone well.
And one of the things, one of the things I think as well that is slightly worrying is that Amazon obviously are really in this not to make the tiny sales from books, but actually to make the bigger sale from a TV. And so that could mean they lose direction in the book world, and it might be an opportunity now for people to come in and challenge their dominance with books, because it's not their ultimate goal, and therefore they lose direction and they stop being as innovative in the area. So there's something in there around there that I think Amazon's role will change if people step up to the challenge and innovate in the right way.
Talking about innovation, does it not feel as if the innovation is in some way slightly plateaued technologically? It feels to me as if the ebook devices that we see and the ebook reading systems that we see are very similar to the ones that were originally created. They haven't changed a great deal, and I find them a little bit frustrating still. I want them to do more than they do. I want them to perform better, look better. It drives me crazy that you can't design an ebook the way you can design a paper book. I think that's one of the things that's quite strange about ebooks still. And it definitely feels to me as if it is an effect of Amazon being the dominant force, it's a great shame that the technology for ebooks is actually still in a very, not exactly a kind of gas pipes and wires hanging out stage, but still in a very early stage. And I want to see the innovation go harder and faster, and it's a place where I think someone could steal the march on them if they're going to keep producing beige Kindles that, you know, kind of have the flashy screen when you turn the page and so on.
Well, I'd like to say about that, you know, one of the, you know, Faber, we produced a series of apps and, you know, sort of future book products, really, you know, the Wasteland edition and those things. And one of the frustrations of that is the ability to actually make that available agnostically to anybody who owns whatever device. And I think one of the reasons that you know, there's been a terrible hurry to say that apps don't work for publishers, it really infuriates me, because in the end, one of the problems we have is just no shops which support that technology currently, but they will come. The shops that can support, so, you know, Android as a platform for us is just a bit unstable. It's very hard to invest in creating apps across the market. But, you know, in the end, there'll be a thing called a book that's full of moving pictures and outsourced to the web and beautiful page design, and it will be digital and it will be available on any device that you happen to own. And I just would like to see the shop that will sell that.
The same applies to audio, most underexploited part of the business. And it's because shops won't stock audio. So it's left to online retailers only. And yet that is a crucial part of spreading the word.
Because the publisher-agent view is very much about distribution, you know.
Yeah.
You know, we're agnostic about the, you know, we're delighted that Michael's here, and we're delighted that, you know, anyone else would be here. We like a range of distribution opportunities. And some parts of the market, especially the one Nick's talking about, where the ebook becomes something more that the author and the publisher, or the author who publishes, can decide how it will reliably turn up on somebody's device. That world is still in its infancy.
It is. Just before we leave, sorry, Nick, I was going to ask you, before we leave Amazon, and while we're still talking about cross-dressing, Amazon as a publisher, would that appeal to you?
The more I hear about Amazon's kind of move in that direction, the more it just sounds to me like a publisher. You know, they've brought in a lot of publishing talent, and they're working very hard to be a publisher. Now, of course, that publisher is attached to the most powerful online retail force in the world, so that makes it, you know, a different kind of thing. But as I understand it, you know, Amazon as a publisher is publishing. So yeah, that's interesting. You know, in the same way that, you know, any publisher is interesting to an author. You're kind of, let's talk. But you know,
and any plans along those lines for you, Michael?
I think the thing that we've always been very cautious about as regards Amazon's publishing ambitions are their general tendency towards gardens that are very well walled, and the caution I think that should go to any author, no matter how tall or beautiful the flowers, the fact that you only get to see them in that one spot. And there are enough other retailers in this mix that it feels short-sighted to me for an author to say, I know these guys are going to treat me fantastically, I can do without everything else, and I'm willing to kind of shackle myself to them. So to that end, we generally want to see authors put their books in as many places as possible and reach as wide an audience as possible. And certainly, while we...
as a publisher, has a very limited scope of distribution. I mean, if you think about in the U.S., let's even assume that they are, that ebooks are, I'm going to use numbers, and Michael, you can make sure I'm right, okay? So ebooks on the fiction side, let's say 65%?
Ish, yeah.
Ish, okay. Amazon of that is 65% again. So you're talking about your book getting 36% distribution. Let's just do the math, right?
You leave a lot of readers behind.
Johnny, that's
and especially when you're fighting
real.
for every reader you can get.
I mean, I have had some experience working with Amazon Publishing when I sold the Ian Fleming, which is, I think we're in the Fleming room, so it's quite... but that backlist from a traditional publisher was moved to Amazon in the US, and with a traditional publisher still in the UK. And I think what they can offer for estates or large backlists is something different to what current mainstream publishers can offer. And that was seen by a tenfold increase in sales. But, whether they are a publisher in the same sense as Random House or Faber are, I mean, that's arguable, and that's up to them to prove.
Always worth at least 10 minutes on Amazon, but let's go elsewhere. Sir, here. Thanks.
Nico McDonald from Media Futures. Picks up on the last conversation which Sam and Stephen and Nick have started around innovation. Is the mainstream publishing industry doing enough innovation to survive and even flourish? And if it isn't, what should it be doing more of? And by innovation, I mean in terms of design, technology, platforms, formats, and not just content.
Yeah. Sam, why don't you take that one?
There's some of us, not everybody by any means. I think that we can't just be traditional publishers anymore. I think that we have to, I mean, one of the things that from my perspective is that everyone talks about needing to change, but I think that we need to have multiple perspectives, and to do that it is about hiring the right people, but one of the things that I think that is crucial for us is to work with different partners. So yes, we can do stuff on our own and we can innovate and do lots of stuff, and I think publishers are actually. I think that a lot of the big publishers are very, very keen to innovate. Let's face it, like most businesses at the moment, it's the buzzword. You've got to innovate in a useful way. So you've got to really, there's no point in innovating unless people actually want it. They're not going to tell you what they want if it's truly innovative. So you have to make sure you truly understand the customer's perspective. Customer centricity everyone talks about, but few people really do. So I think that we need to, publishers need to get much better at fully understanding their customers. So for us, it really is understanding what a customer does every day, what an academic does in my case, of really understanding. I mean, you know, I've spent days watching what someone does when they use, when they're trying to research all of the issues that they have, and really understanding the place in the workflow where you can innovate to help them. So are we doing enough? I think some of us are. I think we can do more by partnering with completely new entrants. That's one of the approaches we've taken that I believe in really strongly. So whether it's through digital science, which are companies that we partly own, that work as separate businesses within Macmillan. So they're completely independent. We don't fully own them, but we work with them, and we can get their innovative ideas and a different approach. It attracts different people, which, as I keep saying, I think publishing hasn't been good at over the same as you, 20 years. I felt very frustrated, to be honest, and I wouldn't have stayed in publishing if it hadn't started to innovate and see things and be more scared, actually. I think it got scared about 10 years ago, and thank God, because I wouldn't have stayed if I hadn't felt that. And so there's a lot to say in there, but...
Thanks, Sam. And Stephen, to the same question, but picking up on what Sam was saying there, there's a tension, isn't it? The customer's always right, but the Steve Jobs dictum of sometimes the producer has to tell the customer what they want. You know, so where do you sit on that line?
Well, yes, I mean, the thing about being a business that exercises taste, if you like, is that you're sort of bought into that idea that essentially you're going to be bloody-minded about what you believe is good. But it's an interesting thing about publishing being characterised as conservative about innovation, which, because interestingly, our daily life is pretty much, we launch the most preposterous number of new products every year, and we fail. And
thank you for that, by the way.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Our pleasure is your bibliographic nightmare, and actually we fail a huge amount of the time to get near our hopes and our expectations, let alone our investments. And it is interesting that publishing has left it to others in some ways to innovate and to partner with. I think part of that is to do with margin. I think part of that is to do with busyness. It's hard enough to do what we do. It's very hard to siphon off a black ops team and say, just go in a cupboard, you know, lose money, and come out with a genius idea. And that's why I think partnership has been so appealing to publishers. And you know, certainly when we've partnered with, say, Touch Press and other copyright holders, so we partnered, for instance, with Bloomsbury to create Drama Online, you know, we genuinely innovated as quite a small business at Faber. And I suppose I talk about the product a lot because I do still think that claiming turf, which we can call the book in the future, is absolutely critical. You know, the plate section was once resisted with some force by parts of the publishing industry. They don't want a plate section. Moving pictures is, of course, our next thing, not to mention our building things around consumers we're talking about. So there's a long way to go. I think the industry is more open to it. than it was. The academic side has led it.
Can I ask you something before you come in? Just before we come in on that, Michael, I want to throw a challenge to you in a way, and it goes to something Nick was saying earlier and Stephen's touching on it. Publishers could innovate all the way, but if the e-reader can't catch the innovation, or at least might not be geared up to it just yet, is that a problem?
Well, I think I have a lot of sympathy for publishers who often get slapped around for not innovating enough. When the challenge has so much to do with their kind of conflicted motivations of, on one hand, wanting to push and evolve the medium, but on the other hand, being the ones ultimately responsible for getting that author as large an audience as possible. And so you can be sitting in front of an author and saying, listen, Stephen's going to put together a Black Ops team. They're going to go away. We're going to build an app that's just about you. It's going to do all of this stuff. And I guarantee you, 5,000 sales on iBooks. And that would be, a not bad run for a custom-built, custom-innovated, kind of genre-breaking app. Or we can do something that much more adheres to the, admittedly, quite pedestrian standards of the day. And I can get you to Kobo's tens of millions of users, and I can get you to Kindle's tens of millions of users, and I can get you through, kind of the platforms that have been built up to try and reach as many readers as possible. And that, to me, is this kind of special publishing innovator's dilemma that we have of, the tiny, perfect, beautiful thing and the 10,000 people that will see it, or the much more standardized thing that looks more or less like a book as we know it, and the tens of millions of readers who can find it. And I think the obligation to those of us who are closest to that reader right now is, how do we push out those platforms in a way that allow more innovation to take place, but don't require us to have it be made individually and custom on a platform-by-platform basis? And that is a very boring, standards-based conversation, but is really the thing that's holding publishing back.
I think that's true, but I have a problem with the dichotomy, the notion that you've got to choose between making the small, perfect app and reaching lots of people. I think I would have each publishing house, each large publishing house, certainly have a skunkworks, go off and build the amazing thing, because I think you need disruption coming from within. I think the difficulty with partnering is that you don't develop necessarily the skills in-house.
I meant something different by partnering, because I'm very with you. So when I say partnership, I mean proper partnership, as in we own part of the company.
Right.
So that you do develop in-house, because I'm absolutely with you.
But the things that I would look for, I want to see, there's an interesting way of looking at industries and change and so on, is to say, what are the transformations which would reshape? And what are the ones which will, and what are the ones which we want? And the things that I talk about and have been talking about for a while, things like bundling digital copies with hardback books, which is something that the movie industry does now, almost pro forma with DVDs, and things like peer-to-peer sales, where each individual smartphone device becomes a point of sale for ebooks or even physical books to be delivered at a later point. Things like that. Questions about whether, does a publishing house need an office in the centre of town? Yes, for meetings with authors and so on who live in that area, but actually you can move most of your infrastructure out, have a serendipitous space, give office space to technology companies and bring them in, and then you have a space where something extraordinarily innovative will happen, and you build something, which looks like a giant tortoise and produces books, and that's wonderful, and which you were not expecting. But the sense that I have is that publishing as an industry, as a culture, still looks to reach a plateau where we can stop thinking about technological change again for a while, and that's not going to happen. And that puts us into the situation of a guy who's chasing after a motorcyclist on foot, and every so often the motorcyclist is kind enough to stop and let him catch up, at which point you shake hands and the guy runs off again. And that's the feeling that I have, is that we innovate up to a given point and go, this is good enough for now, and stop. And at that point, be it Amazon or Apple or somebody else comes along with the magic box that we don't have yet. And just once, we should build our own magic box, and they can catch up with us.
Okay, let's do that. So I totally agree with you. I've tried building magic boxes, as most of my friends know, for the past 5 years. We've had some successes and some failures. This year, we've had the most successes we've ever had. Last month, we became the #1 personalized book platform in the US. which, by the way, is an extraordinary accomplishment. There have been people in that space for 10 years, and it puts us amongst the top book websites, and it will put us on the Internet Retailer top 100 sometime within the next 18 months. So we are actually doing that. I agree with the need for it because you're right, we need that DNA in-house. We don't want it to be just outside. We actually need it to be part of our DNA because change is coming rapidly and there is more change coming. So all of what you said is right. I will say one thing about bundling, because I know you're an advocate. I've tried, I believe I am now at 46 experiments with bundling with different retail partners. I have had not one work, just so you know, and I'll be happy to share that data with you, okay? But nothing has yet
But have you had it not work infrastructurally, or have you had it not work? Because every time I mention it, people who read books go, I want that.
I know, and here is the data. BISG has exactly the same data. People keep saying they want this, and yet when you put it in front of them, and I'm not sure whether you've tried any of those, but when you put it in front of them, they don't buy it. So I wonder which is a distinction between like what they say they want and what they want.
I wonder about whether that's a pricing model issue. You know, the Economist pricing model that Dan Ariely talks about.
I agree, and it's a great experiment.
Just for anybody who doesn't know, the Economist priced the annual subscription digital only at $69 a year, the annual subscription print only at $125 a year, and the print and digital at $125.05 or something. And nobody buys digital only. Almost everybody, I think 82% bought digital and print subscription. If you take out the $125 print-only subscription, lots of people buy the digital subscription only at $69. So it's a piece of sleight of hand that works on buying. The ethics of it do not please me, but let's talk about money.
Thanks.
Richard,
I want to move on.
Really, I mean, there's two things. I think one of the things that publishers did do wrong is we were too internal for too long. I think when, for many years, publishers would only look at other publishers and we thought we were very special. It's great to be special, but we do have to look outside. And I think that I don't see publishing like you describe anymore. I genuinely don't. I used to. But I feel like publishers do want to overtake now and do want to innovate and are innovating from within. And I do mean that quite genuinely.
Thank you, Sam. There's another question over here.
So I'm Peter Hudson from Bitlit, and to Dominique Racca's point, I would love to be number 47. I do have the data on bundling. So we are a service that allows a publisher to bundle a print and digital book together. And I do know the conversion rate, and it's not zero. It's not 90%, it's around 60, assuming the digital content is priced along the lines of the Economist model. So the models do work for certain types of content, especially around nonfiction.
Peter, thank you for that. Johnny, I was just wondering, what's the author agent's view of bundling? Are you getting authors coming to you saying, like Nick, you want this to happen? What's the...
No. Nobody has brought that up, apart from a few readers. I think it's very difficult to work out the value chain in this one. It's the same as the subscription model, unless it's completely separately accounted. What we worry is that, that ebooks are cannibalizing paperbacks, and that if we bundle, it's really a shop, or whatever the expression is.
One-stop shop.
One-stop shop, thank you. So I think publishers, it's not in their interest to bundle. Authors have to work out where is the value in this for their ongoing copyright. And once that is sorted, I think there might be a future, because everything will be dictated by what the reader wants. And publishing shouldn't stand in the way.
The thing is that if the reader doesn't want it, there's no harm in making it possible. And if they do want it, then there's a product to sell.
But the model you might be breaking, you may never get back again.
Yeah. Right. Although you could see it, Johnny, as selling someone an incredibly expensive ebook and giving them a hardback for free.
Yeah. Well, that's...
Now, I suspect we've got time for one or indeed possibly two more. Are there any questions from the floor? If not, I've got one again that came in. Oh, there is one at the back.
Hello, Nathan from Penguin Random House. I work in a world where I'm hearing the word brand often misused or overused, and I was interested to see what the panel, what their view of the word brand is, and when an author can really become a brand.
Michael, now, Kobo's a great brand, but I suspect Nathan isn't talking quite to that, but what's your view on branding in publishing?
Authors for us are probably the most enduring brands we see. With very, very few exceptions, when we look at the search data all the time, we don't see anyone banging the words Random House into the search box. But we see people when they first show up to try us out, throwing author names in to see whether or not we have the authors that they expect to see inside a store. And it's kind of that first litmus test that gets done. They're evaluating us based on our ability to deliver up the authors that they've come to expect inside a good bookstore. And they're doing that far more than they're sort of throwing random keywords in, or they're throwing in words like romance. They have their 5 or 6 authors that they really love, and that's the test. So those are the brands that we see most often. Now there are some publishers that I think have done very good jobs through incredibly consistent delivery in relatively narrow niches, built brands for themselves that have become a mark of quality for a certain segment of readers. But it's a relatively small segment, and the examples of those are relatively few. And you have to be heroically focused from a publishing perspective to be able to earn one of those spots.
Stephen, Faber's a very strong brand itself, but authors as brands?
I suspect the conversation around brands is a shorthand, actually, for the challenges around creating interest online, which is to do with fans. It's to do so writers with fan bases, I suppose, have their index has risen because online, trying to navigate the riot of noise online, you go better if you have something recognizable, which we therefore call brands. So the creation, it's more about, I think, the creation of fan bases. And so I think some of that is about individual writers' relationship to their readers. But I suspect there are other brands that will matter more, which are to do with publishing brands. And publishers have to get much better at building serious identity that's authentic and repeated, reliable, rather than just containers, really. A lot of publishing brands are just containers, and when things are going wrong, everybody lurches to the commercial and does something slightly shameful, and so it seems to me that's the history of publishing anyway. But so getting really serious about this is a brand that you actually are going to manage because it carries with it community and fans. It can play a role in a niche, an Angry Robot or whoever, that it can actually be trusted to have a conversation with a consumer base, which then allows writers who are not brands to be discoverable. So you have, I think, two stories going on here, but mainly I think it's less about brand, it's more about fandom and online.
Nick, are you a brand? Do you want to be a brand?
I have a fairly obvious commercial identity. Harkaway is not my real surname, and I guess my online persona and the way that I represent myself is a kind of geeky, I hope cool, with a slightly overexcited brain, and a pair of ridiculous tartan trousers. And it is recognizable, and people relate to it, and so on, and they find me on social media and so on. I think to whatever extent that's a brand, I build it, I massage it, I make sure it's there, and it is to a certain extent genuine, and it's me. On the other hand, I also look for the imprints of publishing houses and the people who work inside them to be more visible in those arenas, in social media and so on, and to begin to build followings of their own, so that when I do something on Twitter, I can get my publishing house to do that, and that is actually a boost, a signal boost for me that's kind of, marked. The idea that I have more followers than the publishing house that I work with is a little distressing. It's not, it's not the case across the board, but so I think whether that counts as formal branding, in a strict sense, I'm never really clear because I don't have a background in those things. I'm still, incidentally, grievously disappointed that there is no such house as Random Penguin, because the iconography for that would just be wonderful.
Johnny, where do you stand on this?
I think it's probably the word I'm most hate in publishing, and it's the bane of our lives, because I think it's a lazy term. and it's not used properly. I think I agree with Stephen, it's shorthand for something. I don't know what it is. I think it's probably a shorthand for genres. You know, crime is a brand in a sense, and lots of big writers write underneath that. Literary fiction, whatever that means, is a sort of brand, and people stick people in there. We're in the business of trying to get very individual experiences replicated on a massive scale or scaled out. So we have to be true to those individual authors and their work. And within one author's work, there can be 20 or 30 books, all of which are quite different. So the idea of branding in the traditional sense, I don't understand. I simply think it's just the wrong word, and I think I hear a lot of it from big publishers, and I think what they're really referring to is Peppa Pig, or brands that are identifiable merchandising. But if you put that into writing, what we're really saying is a different kind of marketing. How do we get people who like James Patterson to like my debut novelist who's writing like James Patterson? So is James Patterson a brand? I think it's a limiting term, and I think we need to change it.
Sam,
in my world, it's completely different. The brand is incredibly important. It goes back to the Amazon conversation. At the end of the day, and the information overload is so real that if you don't have an identifier for quality, you have a problem. And brands like Nature that have been around for 130 years, that means something very specific and are very, very clear about what they mean. I think probably not necessarily clear in the beginning.
But in fiction, sorry to interrupt, but in fiction it's so lazy. What happens is you get covers that are identical simply because they're brand identity. There's no brand identity.
No, and I completely agree. And the whole conversation about whether authors are a brand, I'm not sure that I agree with you. I'm not sure that's what we mean. I think brand is phenomenally important, and if publishers don't get it right, particularly anyone in the research or academic sphere in the next 10 years, I think you don't survive, because it is an identifier for something, and it has to be with our audience.
And there is a place for the thing where your curated list of books, which is your imprint, is something that's recognisable, and you recognise the taste even if the books are very, very different.
Yes.
And you can go to the imprint and say, I like the way this imprint, the character of this imprint, chooses books, and therefore I will like this book.
Except we were talking about this, Stephen and I, just before, about the idea that what are the restrictions of being Faber because of its brand identity. And for me, Knopf is the model because they can do, as we said, Anne Rice and Murakami or whoever, and Nick Harkaway. They can, the two great
Well, and that's those are the two edges on that sword. You live within those constraints, and as a result, you get to live within the edifice of the Faber brand. You decide to do things shameful and commercial sometimes, and worthy and literary at others.
Bizarre.
It starts to come apart a bit, and if you do a lot of it, you become Knopf.
But I don't think it does come apart. That would be my argument, is that actually you can have Bridget Jones next to Ian McEwan and under Cape, and has that made Cape...
But I would argue that then becomes a brand for an agent and perhaps for an author who's seeking to be published there, but it becomes much less meaningful for a person who's standing in front of a row of shelves going, Knopf, maybe. I didn't like Anne Rice much, but yeah.
It can also be limiting for an author, because a brand can actually, and we see this a lot, authors have to change their names in order to do something slightly different. Oh, I'd like to do something slightly different.
Robert Galbraith. Now we have a couple of minutes left, I think. Is that right, Ornette? So what time for, there's one more question here. Gentleman in the middle of the aisle. A lollipop is on its way to you. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Ali from Creative Scotland, which is the Arts Council with a kilt. Tomorrow is my first London book fair, and I've had lots of advice on what to do. I just wondered if there's any advice from the panel on what not to do tomorrow.
What a great question. We'll go along the line. Stephen, what should Ali not do tomorrow?
Believe anything you see or hear. I would say don't hang around the main aisles.
Yeah, okay.
Go and see the small things that are going on around the edges, and hang around the coffee bars to hear the real conversations. Because I think we're all incredibly busy at that fair, and we all do a lot of business that's routine. But it's often, I find, when I wander off to a different country or to publishers I hadn't heard of, that I see things that are very stimulating. So that's what I do.
Thanks, Stephen. Sam?
Yeah, I have to say I'm not a fan of the book fair.
Ah.
That's from doing many years ago. I did lots of years in sales, and after a while, the trouble is with a book fair, it's now become a functional thing, which is extremely useful for doing certain things like selling rights, and it's of real value there. I'm not sure, I think it's a challenge to make it a place of innovation for exactly the reason I said before, that it's all about publishing, looking at itself, and it's slightly navel-gazing. I think that you've just got to be very clear what you want to achieve and what you want to find out, and then you probably can, because the experts are there. But I have to say, I don't enjoy the wandering around because you can feel a bit aimless. Do you know what I mean? You've just got to be, you want to know what it's
aimless is when innovation happens. Yeah.
Maybe not in the book fair, though.
That was entirely heretical, Sam. I'm going to move on.
Sorry.
I quite agree. Dominique.
Honest. I think I'd follow Stephen and say, what if? You know, I think that you find the most unexpected partners in these kinds of serendipitous meetings. So I'd hang around in lots of odd places.
I've seen. So don't not hang around. Michael, what should he not do?
First of all, don't eat anything that's found within the confines of those walls. It's very, very bad for you. I think one of the things that, having now gone to a bunch of these, I don't make the schedule wall to wall. Because we're seeing publishers all the time. It's not like, that's kind of part of our job. So it's really, who can we run into that we would not have otherwise seen on that regular list of people that we would always go and talk to. And it is new companies, and it's authors who have an interesting idea, and it's somebody who's just starting things up, and we try to kind of I try to carve a lot of time out for the accidental stuff. Yeah. Because that's the one place where you are likely to run into that.
Great. Johnny?
Don't give me your manuscript. Otherwise, I'm happy to talk to you. Or you could go up to the rights agent's centre, look at it for about 12 seconds, and think, thank God I'm not an agent.
Nick?
Don't wear shoes that pinch, and don't trust any advice given to you by anyone who is dressed as a vegetable.
That's advice for life, not just a book fair. I'm going to use a chairman's prerogative and say don't miss the Publishers Association session on showcasing innovation at 2:30 in the Cromwell Room, where we'll have Claire Fox and Joe Twist from Yuki and Michael Baskow from Profile talking about all of these things we've just been talking about today. Thank you all very much for your attention and your questions, and can we give a round of applause to our panel? Thank you.